Thank you, Steve, and good afternoon and welcome to the March webinar for the Spring Hydrologic Outlook. As mentioned, this is Chris Foltz from the National Weather Service Central Region Headquarters. Today's briefing will be a general overview of the Spring Hydrologic Outlook for the Mississippi Basin, including the Red River of the North and the Great Lakes drainages. Additional information and forecasts can be found online at www.weather.gov. Today's presenters are Steve Buin from the North Central River Forecast Center, Jim Knoll from the Ohio River Forecast Center, Kevin Lau from the Missouri Basin River Forecast Center, James Paul from the Arkansas Red Basin River Forecast Center, and Jeff Grushel from the Lower Mississippi River Forecast Center. This webinar is being recorded, and a follow-up email will be sent with information on how to access the recording. If you would like to ask a question during the course of the webinar, you can utilize the questions box in the GoToWebinar GUI, and you can type your question in there. We'll hold all questions until the end, as Steve mentioned. As he also mentioned, if you would like to ask an operator-assisted question, please press *1 on your phone, and they will answer you, and you'll be able to ask the question at that time. So let's go ahead and begin with the first presenter, Steve Buin.
Thank you, Chris. Format of this presentation is that we'll start with going over some of the winter conditions, a quick summary. Most of you were likely on the call 2 weeks ago, but some of you may not have been. We'll do a quick summary of that, catch you up on weather that has affected the Midwest here on the last 2 weeks, and then get into the particulars for each basin of what the particular flood outlook is. So we'll start with the winter precipitation that from December 1st. With the big thing that sticks out on this image is right over the center part of the United States there in Nebraska and Iowa, with the excessive precipitation that we saw in December and early January, and then also down south of that over Missouri and Oklahoma, associated with all the flooding we saw. That has left the landscape pretty wet. Over the last 2 weeks, moving on, we see that we really have dried out somewhat in the latter half of February here into early March, with much of the northern portion of the Mississippi drainage and portions of the western lakes and up into the Hudson Bay drainages have been relatively dry, and the rainfall and snowfall that has occurred has been from the Red River in the south over Texas and Oklahoma up through Arkansas and the Ohio Valley and the eastern lakes, of where the precipitation and storms have been tracking over the last 2 weeks. The last 2 weeks have seen the temperature pattern continue what's really been going on the entire winter. The orange coloring here we see over the eastern two-thirds of the country, indicating above normal temperature or above the average temperatures for the entire winter period, with the highest departure from average being in the northern tier of states from Montana to Michigan. Snowfall has been a little bit spotty over the entire country this winter. As you can see here, if we see the yellow and green being either side of what we consider to be normal for the entire winter, with no areas seeing an excessive amount of snowfall, just slightly above normal there over the Central Plains and over the southern Ohio Valley. Up until 2 weeks ago, the area over the Great Lakes was showing the second category of yellow, but we've seen a couple snowstorms go across there and has brought that area up closer to a seasonal average for snowfall, especially in lower Michigan. And that's reflected here, that the warm temperatures we've seen and the lack of snowfall in most of the area over the last 2 weeks. We've seen the heavy snow that was accumulated over northern Iowa and southern Minnesota was basically melted off in the last 2 weeks, and that heavy snow line has retreated quite a ways up into northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, and extreme northeast North Dakota and upper Michigan. But the new snowfall that came through in the last 2 weeks has put down a fairly light amount of snow in the Dakotas, Iowa, Illinois, with a little heavier area there, highlighted by the red circle over lower Michigan. And in fact, lower Michigan and northern Indiana have seen two distinct heavy snow events. The first one melted off and caused river rises, and now this second event. So it's a particular concern, and we'll get into some details later about that. So soil moisture remains quite high at elevated levels across much of the central CONUS. or continental United States, with the focus of that being Iowa, where the heavy rainfall occurred in December, and that has really not changed dramatically, other than maybe a slight dryness due to the lack of precipitation in the last 2 weeks over the Central Plains. So kind of summing that up in the recently updated U.S. Drought Monitor, we've seen a slight expansion of the dryness over the Dakotas, Montana, and Wyoming, and a little bit of expansion of the dryness in western Oklahoma. But for the bulk of the Mississippi drainage, the Great Lakes, and the Great Lakes region, we've seen no change in the drought status. And in fact, you have to go back to 2005 to have since the beginning of January, we have not seen any drought in the Midwestern part of the U.S., and you have to go back to 2005 to have a period of that length with no drought classified in the central part of the United States. Looking over at the USGS Streamflow conditions, again, we see the predominant color here of the dots of each dot representing a streamflow gauge, the predominant color being green and blue, indicating either normal or above normal streamflow for this period of time in the year, with a little bit of dryness indicated by lower streamflows in Kansas, Oklahoma, and southwest Missouri, and again down into Louisiana. Another thing to note here, it's different than 2 weeks ago, is that many of the gauges in central Wisconsin and southern Minnesota, and even up into the Dakotas and northern Michigan now, are shown on this map, which indicates that the ice has gone out there, and the USGS technicians have visited those sites and determined that the gauges are accurately reflecting the stage-discharge relationship, and so they appear back on here. So the ice has gone out in many rivers across Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan. Due to some of the precipitation that we have seen in the Oklahoma and into the Ohio Valley over the last 2 weeks, has used a little bit of the available flood storage. These numbers have come down just a little bit from 2 weeks ago, but again, completely adequate storage to handle the expected runoff this spring. So now we'll shift gears and we'll start to look at what weather we have coming at us here in the next couple weeks and out into the season. And what we're showing here is the next week of a deterministic or kind of a best shot of what the rainfall will be, total rainfall would be in the next week up through March 10th. And with that big bright red and orange spot there centered over Arkansas, indicating that we're expecting a fairly significant weather event to impact the area in the next 7 days. That is a very large area of potentially over 2 inches of rain, indicated by the dark purple extending from Illinois and Indiana back southwestward to East Texas and down to the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, with the centroid there being 5.9 inches. This event bears watching, and let's look at a couple other things here to illustrate where this might go. And in fact, we're expecting much of the Mississippi Valley and Great Lakes to experience some fairly significant precipitation. The only area in the next week not expected to get much precipitation is the high northern plains of the Missouri drainage. Looking at this precipitation forecast another way, this is a depiction from the North American Ensemble Forecast System of the 16-day, and their ensemble meaning many members, many model runs. Taking the mean of those model runs, we're indicating, again, a very large area in the southern part of the Mississippi drainage here, impacting both the Arkansas Red, the Missouri, the Middle Mississippi, and the Ohio to some extent, but with the focus being there in the south central portion of the U.S. right over the lower Mississippi, a large area of potentially 6+ inches of rainfall. Again, this event bears watching in this next week to 10 days. Looking out a little bit further, this weather event that's going to impact the south central part of the country later in the period will move to the east and start affecting maybe the upper Ohio River and then the east coast and a ridge of dry weather indicated by that dark brown on the right-hand image there, indicating maybe some drying weather moving in at the end of the period. And again, looking at the left-hand image indicating, with the red indicated there, above normal temperatures have a better chance of occurring than below normal temperatures. Thus, we can kind of rule out any significant snowfall events. Our March outlook, if you remember from 2 weeks ago, we'll talk about the right-hand image first. The precipitation chances had an area over the Great Lakes indicating about a 40% chance of tilting towards drier conditions and than normal. And that has been removed in this update that was made on the 29th. So now much of the Mississippi Basin here for the month of March is looking at equal chances of being above or below normal for precipitation. And that area of enhanced area to the southwest of there over Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, of chances lead to being above normal precipitation in that area. So with the event that's coming in here and extending through much towards the middle of the month, it's looking like we're leaning maybe towards above normal precipitation for much of the southern part of the Mississippi Basin, including the Ohio Valley. Temperatures will look to continue to be the leaning towards the chances that they'll be above normal here for the entire month, as indicated by the chart on the left, with the red and oranges being over the northern tier, extending all the way down to Arkansas. Our seasonal outlook has not been updated. This is the same outlook that we had back in mid-February, with climate signals indicating that we should, and later in the spring, tilt towards potentially there for drier conditions over the Great Lakes region, and still accentuating the chances for wetter than normal conditions over the southwest, spilling into the southern plains. And temperatures on the left-hand side, again, indicating that theme that chances on the northern tier, the northern half of the country, leaning towards better chances of being warmer, with cooler south of there down over Texas. The drought outlook basically then remains the same, is that based on those climate signals, we can't really forecast that drought's going to move into anywhere or really come out of drought in the areas that currently have drought over North Dakota and Montana and Wyoming. So in a general overview then, this is a currently updated image off of our Advanced Hydrologic Prediction Service website of our experimental long-range flood outlook. We're showing all of our river gauges in the Mississippi and Great Lakes and Hudson Bay drainages here, and 173 of those gauges are showing that there's a greater than 50% likelihood of experiencing minor flooding this spring through May, with 27 of those gauges indicating, with the red squares, being a 50% chance of seeing or greater of seeing a moderate flood. And that's concentrated pretty much in that area that has been excessively wet from December and is seeing relatively high stream flows at the current time due to this early snow melt and some rains we've seen, and also then with rains that are forecast here over the next couple weeks. So we're going to move on now to particular basins, and we'll start with the Ohio River Basin and Jim Knoll.
All right, thank you, Steve, and good afternoon, everyone. Definitely, as Steve has noted, there's been some changes here in the last couple of weeks with the weather pattern wetting up the Ohio River Basin and Cumberland Basin further, and now we have some upcoming weather, it appears, over the next several weeks. The big things I want to note over the last 2 weeks is we did have an area of below normal flood risk in northern Ohio, northwestern Pennsylvania, and southwestern New York, near the Great Lakes drainage area of Lake Erie. We have removed that and returned that to normal risk. The other thing is, across the rest of the basin, prior to this, we had normal flood risk. We have increased that to above normal flood risk now across southern Illinois, southern Indiana, and a good portion of the central and western part of Kentucky down into Tennessee, with the upcoming storm system here in about a week from now. So overall, we are expecting a normal flood risk now across the Ohio Valley, particularly the upper Ohio Valley, with above normal flood risk extending down into the lower Ohio Valley and down into the Cumberland Valley regions. Specifically, because we do not have any snowpack, this is basically a rain forecast, so it comes down to our ability to forecast rainfall. So what we are expecting over the next 3 months, and really focused, as I will talk about here in the next few minutes, in the Ohio Basin, March is our peak flood month of the year. We do get flooding very routinely in the Ohio River Basin year-round, but our peak flood month is typically the month of March. In Indiana and Illinois, we are continuing to expect minor flooding across the Wabash, Little Wabash, White, and Maumee basins. Again, we cannot rule out a few moderate floods as well. Extending further south into Kentucky and Tennessee, we are expecting minor flooding across portions of the Kentucky, Green, and Cumberland basins. Further into the upper Ohio Valley, we don't anticipate as much in the way of flooding. That's why we're calling that a normal flood risk. So we are expecting some isolated minor flooding in Ohio, particularly in the Maumee Basin, as it gets clipped by some of the heavier rainfall from some of these weather systems in the coming weeks. And finally, in West Virginia, we do expect some minor flooding in the Monongahela and Little Kanawha basins. Moving on to the next slide, we showed this a couple of weeks ago. This is one of our experimental 44-day river runs from our climate weather models. And the green solid line on that image indicates our climatological flows in the lower Ohio River. And the main message here is that red line is what we're actually forecasting, and that's showing that it's above the green line, so we are expecting above normal flows in the lower Ohio River Basin, really extending from now into the first half of April. You can see as we get into the middle of April on the end of that right portion of that image, you see the red line converging with the green line, indicating a return to more normal flows even in the lower Ohio River Basin as we move into from the middle portion of April on into May. So again, we are expecting a fairly significant event here in the middle of the month that'll linger on in the river system into the end of March. Moving on to the next slide. As Steve alluded to, we are expecting a pretty widespread significant rainfall event next week and into next weekend. And our normal rainfall in the Ohio Valley for the next couple of weeks averages of 1.5 inches in the northern Ohio River Basin to around 2 inches down into the lower Ohio River Basin and Cumberland valleys. We are expecting a wide area of 2 to 5 inches with some isolated higher totals, and this will likely lead to at least minor, if not possibly some moderate flooding in the lower Ohio River Basin and Cumberland Valley in the next few weeks. So if we move on to the final slide that we have for the Ohio and Cumberland Valley, again, we are expecting minor flooding due to rainfall this spring, particularly across West Virginia, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Some moderate floods are possible. When we look at the 50% chance, we're showing a lot of minor floods, but if you look just outside of that range, there's quite a bit of moderate floods forecast in the lower Ohio River Basin in the 25 to 45% chance. So certainly there is some risk of some moderate floods in the lower Ohio River Basin and possibly the Cumberland Valley, especially in the month of March. The flood risk is considered near normal across most of the Ohio River Basin. The exception is in the lower Ohio River Basin and Cumberland River Basins. We have raised that again to above normal flood risk, and this is really focused in the next 30 days of our 90-day outlook. And with that, now I'm going to turn it to Steve Buin again to talk about the upper Mississippi Valley.
Thanks, Jim. So we move up into the north-central part of the country, and of course we have to talk about snow. First off, we're looking at the snow water content in detail over the subbasins of the watersheds, and we see the predominant color being dark orange, indicating less than 1/4 inch of water content in the snow that's around. This is a significant decrease in the snowpack over northern Iowa, southern Minnesota, and southwest Wisconsin. from what we had on the ground 2 weeks ago with the warm temperatures we've had. This has initiated some melt, a rise in the rivers, moving out of the ice, and some minor flooding down in Iowa as a result of this. We can see up into the Souris River Basin, very little snow on the ground. Into the Red River Valley, the reports are there's very little visible snow, but there's a lot of ice and snow in the ditches that's still to come out. That's what our model reflects here and why we show snow on the ground there. There's still considerable snowpack, which is very typical up in the upper Michigan and the northern parts of lower Michigan, but when we move down into lower Michigan, we don't seem to see much down there, but as we go to the next slide, we're going to see that what is there is climatologically significant. In fact, that we don't really see too much snow on the ground at this time of the year, so to get a half an inch of water content on the ground is significant. And so what happened with this, we had a snow about a week and a half ago, and then that melted rapidly, and all the rivers in southern Michigan and northern Indiana went on the rise, and then now we had another significant snow event here just 2 days ago. And so we've got rivers that are elevated, we got more snow on the ground, and with this potential for rain coming, we'll see what that might cause here for our flood outlook. The warm temperatures that we've seen in the last 2 weeks have really taken the frost out of the ground. There's hardly any left in maybe just northern Illinois. It's pushed up into central Michigan. Much of Iowa is frost-free, and also southern Minnesota. Really just the areas that have retained a little bit of snowpack in Wisconsin and central Minnesota, and then on northward, still retain frost in the ground. So looking at the big picture here, all the way from the Souris Basin to the Great Lakes Basins and then down to the St. Louis area, we can see the concentration of the chances for minor and even moderate flooding at the 50% level is pretty much concentrated in the Mississippi Basin of states of Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri, with the Great Lakes states seeing and the northern states seeing very little chance of much flooding at the 50% level. Now, climatologically, in many of these regions, the chance of flooding in any given spring is somewhat just below 50%. So we're still seeing a fairly climatological risk of flooding for much of the area, with the exception being from north central Minnesota back westward across the Dakotas. That's where we see a below average risk. But I'd say everything south and east of a line from Minneapolis to Marquette, Michigan, that's much more close to a climatological risk. So we're not saying that the risk is low just because it shows green here, but it's at the climatological risk. Let's get into the basins in particular, and we'll look at the Great Lakes first. Now, we're showing all green squares here, which shows that climatologically it's less, we're seeing less than 50% chance of flooding. But we had many streams that got right up near flood stage with the last snowmelt rise. Now we have new snow on the ground and expecting some additional rainfall in the next week to 10 days. There is a near-term risk for seeing some minor flooding, and if the rain gets heavy, we could even see some moderate flooding in this area. So people with interest in the area outlined there in the circle really need to be watching out for flooding in the next 2 weeks. North and west of that area is still pretty much locked into snowpack, and we'll have to see how that melts off. But their risk for flooding is kind of at their climatological normal. Moving over into the Mississippi River Basin, this is our area of elevated risk over Iowa, Illinois, and especially along the main stem river due to the high ambient stream flows we're seeing in this area that are above normal for the time of the year. We've had some recent snow melt that's gotten the rivers rising, and we've got some rainfall coming forecast here for the next 10 days. Put those three things together there, and this area of the Mississippi watershed, all the way from the Kankakee River in northern Indiana over to the Wapsipinicon, Iowa, Des Moines River in Iowa, these areas all are at some near-term risk for flooding with that expected rainfall that's coming up here. Now, north of that circled area, we're not expecting as much rainfall over that period of time, and their risk for flooding remains at climatology, or if you get north of the Twin Cities, less than climatology. We move up into the Hudson Bay drainages of the Souris River in north-central North Dakota and the Red River in the Red River Valley in the eastern portion and northwest Minnesota. Here, the lack of snow is really driving this, and that there's just a much reduced risk for a moderate or major flood. If the spring rains come in here, we'll see some moderate flooding as the soils are not receptive to to infiltration in the springtime until that goes. So we're at risk here through March, even with no snow on the ground, if the rains come. But it's at a lower than climatology in this area. So to sum it up, the wet soil conditions in the south central portion of the middle Mississippi, snowpack's been below normal, so that's a good thing. But frozen ground may still cause a problem in the northern areas until that snow gets out of there and it comes out of the ground, leaving us susceptible to the early rains. And we have that heightened risk for some flooding with the recent snow melts and the snow on the ground. And then with the rain coming in here, we can look for Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, eastern Missouri, and the main stem Mississippi to be where we have to really be looking out here for this first round of potential flooding in the next 10 days to 2 weeks. And with that, I'll be turning it over to Kevin Lau at the Missouri River Basin Forecast Center.
Thank you, Steve. Again, my name is Kevin Lau, and I'll be focused on the Missouri River drainage. I'll start off by saying that our office is projecting a below normal risk for flooding in much of the western and northern portions of the Missouri River Basin, and a generally normal risk for flooding in the eastern portion of the Missouri Basin. So initially, let's look at the mountains. The left-hand plot shows the mountainous basin snowpack conditions in percent of normal snow water equivalent. Snowpack conditions in the mountains can be categorized as near average in the basin above Fort Peck and in the North and South Platte headwaters. Below average snowpack conditions exist in the Milk and in the Yellowstone basins. The March water supply forecast developed by the Natural Resources Conservation Service and collaborated with our office will be issued next week. And so the summary graphic that you see on the left shows the February water supply forecast and represents conditions as of February the 1st. So it's a month old. Now the February 1st forecast that you do see suggests a below average mountain snowmelt runoff season for 2016 overall, with the Platte River system contribution being near normal. Preliminary numbers that I've seen from our office suggest that the March water supply forecast will not differ appreciably from the February forecast that you see there on the right-hand side. So in summary, we still expect overall a below normal mountain snowmelt runoff season. Now the next slide shows a typical snow water equivalent accumulation plot for a snowtail station. This one here is for Monument Peak, which is located in the headwaters of the Yellowstone. And I show this graph to illustrate just how far along we are in the accumulating season in the mountains. The light blue trace is the historic accumulation plot for the past 30 years. And so for this date, March 3rd, we are typically about 80% through the snow accumulating period overall in the mountains. So not to say that things couldn't change over the next month or so, we are closing in on the end of the mountain accumulating season. And so with a below average mountain snowpack, our long-range river stage projections do not indicate the likelihood for significant flooding due to mountain snowmelt alone. Moving to the next slide, we've picked up some plain snow that I believe Steve mentioned about this past Monday going into Tuesday, with a swath of about a half an inch or less liquid equivalent across eastern Montana, North and South Dakota into Iowa. Elsewhere, the plains are free of snow with the exception, of course, of the Black Hills, which they're also running below normal. So a wet fall and an early winter has left soils in the eastern portion of the basin wet, especially in eastern Nebraska and western Iowa. Melt from the early February snow event has already resulted in some flooding, primarily minor, in the Little Sioux and the Rock River basins, and some high flows along the lower end of the Big Sioux River in Iowa. The unusually warm winter has limited the extent and the depth of frozen ground, as Steve mentioned. Thus, frozen ground is not expected to be a significant factor in plains runoff production this spring in the Missouri Basin. Likewise, the warm temperatures have limited the formation of river ice, and ice jam flooding is not expected to be a significant concern during this season's thaw. Our most recent long-range river outlooks do downplay the risk of significant flooding this spring in the northern plains. So with this slide that you see here, convection drives springtime flooding in the southern third of the Missouri Basin. Long-range forecasts developed by our office just a couple of days ago suggest the likelihood of minor to moderate flooding this spring in areas of eastern Nebraska and eastern Kansas, western Iowa, and across the state of Missouri. River systems which could experience minor flooding this spring include the Platte River in Nebraska, the Little Sioux, the Rock, and the Nishnabotna rivers in Iowa, the Sheraton River in Missouri, and the southern end of the Big Blue Basin in Kansas. The potential for moderate flooding exists along the lower portion of the Big Sioux River in Iowa, the Grand, Platte, and Osage River basins in Missouri, and in the Meridicine in Kansas. The main stem Missouri River below Nebraska City could also see flooding due to springtime thunderstorm activity. But all of this is quite typical in the lower third of the basin. So in summary, average to below average mountain snowpack, and we only have about 20% of the snow accumulating period remaining overall in the mountains. We only have a trace of plain snow in the northern tier. Half an inch is probably the maximum value, and most reports are much less than half an inch of liquid equivalent in that plain snow. Most of the plains is snow-free. The warm fall and the winter has resulted in little river ice action, and the ground is not deeply frozen. Significant flooding due to mountain snow runoff is not likely, and wet soils in the eastern half of the basin will likely lead to minor to moderate flooding. And this concludes the Missouri forecast, and I'll turn it over to James for the Arkansas Red.
Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, everyone. Since the last outlook 2 weeks ago, the ABRC has had a couple of storm systems that moved across our area, bringing precipitation to mainly the western and southeastern portions of the basin, as seen in the upper left graphic. Amounts, however, were not enough to really produce any flooding, amounts were not enough to produce any flooding or offset the lack of precipitation that we saw during the first 2 months of 2016. However, our hydrologic model continues to show above normal soil moisture conditions, as seen in the lower right graphic, across much of the basin due to the lingering effects of the much above normal precipitation that occurred at the end of 2015. On the next slide, the NRCS SNOTEL analysis continues to show near normal snowpack in the upper reaches of the Arkansas River in Colorado. Right now it's between 95 and 100% of normal, and this is slightly lower than what we showed a couple of weeks ago when numbers were around 105 to 110%. Again, as a reminder, typical snowmelt flooding in that area occurs in late May and early June. The Corps of Engineers and Bureau of Reclamation reservoirs in our area are still in good shape and have most, if not all, of their flood pool storage available to capture quite a bit of runoff from any significant storms we get in the next few months. Finally, on my last slide, you'll notice a few more orange, red, and even a purple location on the long-range outlook map that weren't there 2 weeks ago. The reason for this is twofold. The additional couple of weeks that have been added to the outlook period that goes now to the end of May are historically more hydrologically active, so it is just more climatologically probable for flooding to occur in our area. The other point is if you hovered on any one of those points at that long-range outlook web location listed at the bottom of the slide, The image that pops up has 3 models instead of the typically 2 model output that we normally show. The third model is an experimental and incorporates longer range precipitation forecasts besides just historical rainfall patterns. And the color coding on this map keys off of the highest percentage model, and in some cases that is the experimental model. So if you look at that, you kind of have to take that output with a grain of salt. Realistically, however, springtime flooding in our area can occur at most locations, especially in the eastern 2/3 of the basin, and is driven by individual or multi-day storm event systems. With that in mind, in general, we were looking at a near normal risk through the outlook period. However, in the near term, with the heavy rainfall event that we are expecting next week that Steve already mentioned earlier, there is an above normal risk for flooding on the tributaries of the ABRFC's portion of the Arkansas River in Arkansas, and also on the tributaries of the Red River in extreme southeast Oklahoma. With that, I'll hand it off to Jeff at the Lower Mississippi River Forecast Center.
All right, thank you, James. Good afternoon. This is just a graph that I think you've probably seen already of the 90-day percent of normal rainfall across the area. And really 2 areas that are depicted here, one being in the southwest parts of Missouri, northwest Arkansas area. That was really from all the heavy rainfall that we had back in December and January, and with the drier conditions that we've had over the last month and a half or so, those areas are starting to improve and almost getting back to normal conditions for those areas. Further eastward in the Tennessee Valley, we have had rainfall events over the last couple of months that have increased the soil moisture conditions across the middle portions of Tennessee and western portions of North Carolina. And so those areas remain wet and continue to be wet over the coming days. The other thing I wanted to mention, too, is we've actually been very dry over parts of Louisiana and Mississippi and even western parts of Tennessee. So things have actually been below normal in some of those areas there. And as Steve and others have shown you for next week, I think things will change over those areas. So next slide. Yeah, just looking at the USGS Streamflow conditions, it kind of gives you a good idea of where the wet conditions are and dry areas are. And you can actually see in parts of Arkansas, we are getting actually below normal stream flows for some of the tributaries across Arkansas, exception being the lower part of the White River Basin, which still has elevated conditions. As you can see, in the middle portions of Tennessee and in the East Tennessee Valley, you can still see that things are still above normal stream flow-wise. We also have areas in Mississippi along the Pearl River and Big Black Basins that actually are above normal as well from recent rainfall. Didn't highlight Louisiana, but you can see in the southwest parts of Louisiana that things are below normal in that area. Next slide. So what we're looking at, based on all the input from upstream, is we're still looking for above average potential for flooding along the Mississippi River. The areas on the lower part of the White, really, if we'd had about a week and a half of dry conditions, we probably wouldn't have much of a threat on the lower part of the White River in Arkansas either. But with the upcoming rainfall event that we're looking at spreading all across Arkansas, we still will have a good potential of minor to moderate flooding along the lower White. And then also, too, in the upper parts of the Ouachita Basin as well. If the rainfall holds true, then we get anywhere between 4 to 6 inches of rainfall in that area. Other areas that will have a potential for higher potential for flooding this coming season will be in the Tennessee Valley, anywhere in Middle Tennessee, northern Alabama, western parts of North Carolina, and then also, too, in Mississippi along the Pearl River Basin and Big Black Basins as well. So finally, on my last slide here, the conditions for our area, flood potential will be above normal for the lower Mississippi, Atchafalaya, and lower parts of the Ohio River. Areas of the lower White in Arkansas, portions of Mississippi with the Pearl and Big Black and Tennessee Valley rivers will have a higher potential. Obviously, with the heavier rainfall that we're seeing next week, just about all of Arkansas will have a potential for getting some minor flooding and possibly some moderate flooding if the rainfall holds true. Just like everybody else has said, with the southern areas, all the potential for flooding in our area is really driven by any sort of convective rainfall storm events, any of the upstream rises that we have on the upper tributaries of the Ohio, Mississippi, and Missouri basins. And that's all I had, and I'll turn it back over to Steve.
Okay, Jeff, thank you. And so kind of looking in sum, if you look at the whole area in sum, we got a large area of near normal risk, and then there's pockets here and there of the above normal risk for various reasons, whether it be from the antecedent wet conditions that we saw from early in the winter, or from some snow melt that might be exacerbated by spring rains coming here in the next week or two. So right now we're not looking for major flooding. Our tools show us minor to moderate flooding, but we cannot rule out major flooding if the rains concentrate in one area. So this kind of slide kind of sums it all up here, but basically at this point we're concluding this second spring flood outlook, but we will continue to monitor the evolving flood risk and schedule further briefings as the situation warrants. So at this point we'll turn it back to Chris for questions.
All right, Steve, I appreciate the update that you guys have given. We've only got one question that's come in through the GoToWebinar GUI, and that was recently submitted here. And it's a question about the Mississippi at Cairo, basically asking for some sort of a prediction, given the predicted rainfall over the next 2 weeks, if there's any sort of a prediction at this point where the stage in Cairo might get to.
Yeah, we kind of looked at that already with the 16-day QPF NAEFS product that was shown earlier. Right now, indications are they would get above moderate flood stage. Just numbers showing anywhere between 47 to 48 feet based on the rainfall that we're anticipating for next week. So maybe another moderate event at Cairo, Illinois, based on what we're seeing right now.
All right, Jeff, that's the only question I had. Steve, operator, is there any questions that have come in through the operator-assisted line?
At this time, I would like to remind everyone, in order to ask a question, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. We'll pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster. Again, if you'd like to ask a question over the phone, please press star 1. And there are no questions over the phone at this time.
All right, thank you, Steve. Well, we'll go ahead and continue to wrap things up here. So I just want to thank everybody for participating in today's webinar. As the slide before this previous slide mentioned, this is the last scheduled briefing for the spring, but there could be additional briefings scheduled if conditions change substantially, and an email will be sent out if there are additional briefings scheduled. As a reminder, there is additional information and forecasts available online at www.weather.gov. And with that, we'll go ahead and conclude this webinar for today. Have a great afternoon.